So good day, friends. This is Dr. Bob Hamilton, and you have tuned in today to the Hamilton Review, where kids and culture collide. Before we get into my conversation with my guests today, I want to say thank you to those of you who've tuned into the show. All of you listening, I thank you for that. It means a lot to me. I know what you're doing, and you're busy people, so thanks for checking in. And also, if you like what you hear, and I hope you do, share it with your friends, your family. We are trying our best to build an audience on this podcast to introduce all of you listeners to phenomenal people, the people I bring on a weekly basis. And today is no exception. Today is a pleasure to welcome to the Hamilton Review Dr. Sarah Schnitker. She is a Ph.D. From Davis, California, which we'll talk about maybe a little bit later on. You're near and dear to my heart because I have a bachelor's of science from Davis, California. Her major was, her PhD is in personality and social psychology. And she now has a bigger job down in Baylor. But before we get to that bigger job, Dr. Sarah Schnitker, welcome to the Hamilton Review.
Well, thank you so much for having me today. Really glad to be here.
Really a pleasure. So Dr. Schnitker, she's got a couple of titles, but she is, first of all, the founder and the head of what is called the Brights Center at Baylor. Brights is actually not the name of a person. It's actually an acronym. It stands for Baylor's Research in Growth and Human Thriving Science. And so, by the way, how long did it take you guys to come up with that name? Because I mean, Brights is such a happy word, first of all. And so I like the name, but you guys obviously had to kind of think about how you make an acronym to make the name, right?
Well, and it actually has more meaning than that. So Baylor at the time, our strategic plan for the university was the Illuminate strategic plan. And we talk about letting our light shine bright and use a lot of imagery of light. And so I was like, oh, I wonder if I can get something to fit with bright or brights or something related to this. And it actually came pretty quickly. It took probably about 15 minutes and I found it.
That's amazing. Well, I listen, I love the idea of growth and human thriving. That to me speaks to me. And so anyway, we're going to talk about both of those issues, by the way, because human thriving is kind of what this show is all about, number one. But in addition to being the innovator, the person who started this center and also the head of it right now, she also is a head over a subset or an affiliated lab down there in Baylor. It's called the Center for the Science of Virtues Laboratory, which works in conjunction with the Brights Center. That too is fascinating to me, Dr. Schnitker.
Yeah. It's kind of a funny name because people are like, what? What is this? But it's one of my favorite things to bring science tools to study things that we often don't with science.
Yeah.
So
No, when you say the science of virtues, I kind of go, that was what caught my eye. I read I think a quote from you, and they identified you as the head of the laboratory, the Center for the Science of Virtues lab. And I thought it seemed to be incongruent in my mind. So that was one reason why your name kind of popped up on my radar. So listen, I like to start my shows by having my guests talk about themselves. And you have a great story. So I'm going to stop babbling away here and turn the microphone over to you. So Dr. Sarah Schnitker.
Yes.
Schnitker, you're on.
Well, I grew up with a great family. Dad's an engineer. Mom was a homemaker for many years, also taught preschool and worked in different fields, and really someone who volunteered a ton in the community. And we lived kind of all over the U.S., spent the most time in Maryland, and also grew up in very much connected to faith and spirituality and thinking about morality in our family. And that was something important to us, developing character. Um, so when I got to college, I went to Grove City College in Western Pennsylvania. Um, and my freshman year, I thought I would go into psychiatry. So I love psychology. Um, but I thought, oh, I can be a medical doctor, do psychiatry. But I got to college and I realized that professors not only teach, but they get to do research. And that there were some really interesting areas of research because I was always attracted to great literature and philosophy and these questions that all human beings face of like, what makes a good life? What's my purpose? How do I become good myself? How do we get people in society who are good people and develop well? And um, I was exposed to the work of Dr. Peter Hill, one of my professors, and said, oh, there's actually psychology researchers who study these questions of how do we help kids be grateful? How do we um, promote the good life? And I just fell instantly in love with this kind of work. And my freshman semester, I said, oh, I don't want to be a MD. I want to get my PhD and be able to just focus on these things that fascinate me. And I think that I've never met a human who doesn't care about this, who doesn't care about um, for parents raising good kids. And we care deeply, but we could learn a little more if we use some of the tools of science um, to kind of interrogate these questions.
Absolutely. So back in Maryland when you were a kid, you're one of how many, Sarah?
Yes, I have a younger brother who is 6 years younger.
So
Um,
there were two of you.
there are two of us, and grew up playing in the woods. We lived kind of had an acre plot, but like all her neighbors also had just land in the back, and really enjoyed those times in nature. And I was definitely a bit of a nerd as well, as you might expect. But love to learn and explore. And um, I also, one of my favorite games though to play as a kid was playing school. And I would be the teacher and I would force my poor younger brother to be the student. And I would teach him. And um, one day, I remember one time when I was a little older, I let him be the teacher, and he's like, "You wicked!" He was like the meanest teacher ever. It was just yelling at me. I'm like, "Oh dear, I need to work on my technique if this is what
I
his
think he
perception."
he needed to enroll in the Bright Center. That's what I would
Yes,
say.
exactly. Or maybe I did if that's the model he had.
Right. So that's cute. I mean, it's funny how what kids do in play, and
Yep,
obviously they let their imaginations go wild. It sounds like you had a relatively idyllic childhood.
I did. I
Yeah.
did. I'm incredibly grateful for the childhood I had, and especially now as a researcher, knowing just how important those kind of secure attachment relationships are, knowing that you are loved and cared for and not have to worry about basic needs. um,
Yeah.
I was, yeah, that was, a lot of kids don't have that. And so I was very grateful for that
A
for
lot of
sure.
us too don't realize the incredible blessing it is to have a stability in our family. And
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, you don't, your kids, how could you kind of like go, oh, when you're 5 or 6, mom and dad, thanks for providing such a stable background.
Yeah.
Kids who are 5 years of age are kind of a little bit
Yeah.
still a little narcissistic in their mind. But anyway, but you look back and you kind of go, not bad.
Yep.
Yes, did we, did you have everything? We didn't. I don't know about you if you
No.
did. No. But you had what you needed, clearly, but more than important, you had two adults in your life who cared about you and loved you, and that's
Yep.
powerful. So you talk about you were spiritually or morally minded. You were church people, is what you're
Yeah.
saying.
We were church people. We regularly attended, um, and not just attendance, but right. Our faith was important to us um, in the home as well. And um, reading scriptures and praying as a family, and also with our faith really serving community as well. So
Yeah.
opening up our home, we often hosted international students um, from the college nearby and kind of sponsor them, that their family for a year, bring them over, feed them. And I think that was something I really enjoyed, getting exposure. We weren't able to travel internationally a ton when I was younger, but having exposure to people from different cultures and just learning how to be hospitable and having that kind of open attitude of, oh, there's different ways people do things around the world.
Yeah.
And this is really interesting to think about how other humans live and what we might learn.
There's a bigger world to be discovered
Yes.
and explored in that, and definitely having people into your home makes does make a difference. We had a couple of those folks in our home as well. So you're doing so here you are at Baylor. You got your degree from UC Davis, and then you ended up in Baylor. And tell us a little bit about what you guys do at the Brights Center. So this is you're talking about growth in human thriving. Maybe we can start by maybe asking more basic questions. So when you talk about growth and thriving, I kind of envision, I see something. I see almost like a plant
Hmm.
growing and thriving and producing fruit, good fruit. So how do human beings grow and thrive?
Yep. And I think just like a plant, it's a great metaphor, because just like a plant, kind of what's happening to the plant matters, but it's really about that context. What is the soil? Is there moisture appropriate? Is there care and tending and sometimes pruning, right? So for human beings, um, we start all a little bit differently. We have genetic variation, but when we think about helping someone thrive, it's really thinking about, who is this person and what is their context, and how is there a good fit between the two. And so for many, I mean, there's some things that all plants need that all humans need. All humans need basic needs. All humans need love from caregivers when they're young, and that kind of unconditional love and support from that caregiver who is wild about that baby. Um, but then we also see that different kids and different people have slightly different needs. Some people need more attention, some need less, some want different types of engagement. And so looking at the young person and their context and seeing, is this the optimal conditions where this young person can grow? But when we talk about thriving, we also think about, if we're not just thinking about an individual plant, but almost a forest.
Yeah.
So if some people's thriving or growth is actually depleting the resources that other people need, that's not good, right? We want to have young people, especially as children become adolescents um, and move into adulthood. You want to see that not only am I happy and doing well and showing indicators of kind of living up to who, in my kind of theological position, how God created me or who I am supposed to be, um, but also, am I contributing back and creating part of creating an environment that helps other people to flourish and really grow into who they are intended to be. And so you often see, traditionally in a lot of psychology research, when we looked at kind of well-being, we just look at, like, am I satisfied with my life? Am I having more good emotion, positive emotions and fewer negative emotions? But that's a little anemic.
Yeah.
And instead, with my research in particular, the part I like to look at is, in my Science of Virtues lab, is who makes a good member of a community in a group. It's someone who's kind and generous and honest and has these character strengths or virtues that are necessary for a good society.
Yeah.
That we need people who have not just moral ideals, but also can put them into action and treat others with love and respect. And so that's the thing. so our research center really tries to look at anything that could contribute to that thriving
Yeah.
and that trajectory of thriving throughout life. But my work, I want to say, I'm specifically interested in the thing we haven't studied as much, which is not just how to prevent mental illness or promote kind of physical health and mental health, but also how do we actually create good people, people that can actually, I want to be around.
Sure, and also make a difference in the community.
Exactly.
I had a young man recently in my office, and he actually had a significant psychological event happen, and
Mm,
I told him, I said, one of the things that we were talking about, what can we do? Okay, where do we go from here? And I said, you need to think of a way to volunteer somewhere. Just
yep.
go out and be with other people and help other people. When you begin to participate and be the solution for other people's problems, whether it be, walking an old lady across the street. I know that's, the Boy Scouts were supposedly doing that. That helps another person. And I think when you do that, obviously, Jesus said it famously, it's better to give than receive. I sincerely believe that in my heart. Certainly, we're talking about material things, but I think if you are just actions, if our actions as we go out there and help people, there is certainly a reciprocal benefit that we feel, and we also feel a sense of a belonging. And I'm
Yes.
sure that you guys research those things down
Yep.
there.
Yeah. And that's what we find. It's interesting. We often talk about like doing good and feeling good. And just as you said to your patient, like one of the best and easiest ways to actually feel good is to actually go and do good in the world. That we sometimes think about these in our culture, like, oh, you can like be good and but you'll have kind of a negative experience in life, or you'll just miss all the parties and it will kind of stink. But that's not at all what we see is with the people who have the best life experience and actually feel good and have fewer mental illness symptoms and right are really psychologically healthy and happy, actually just plain old happiness. Those you often get there. One of the surest ways is to treat others well, to engage in kindness, to be grateful, to practice these moral kind of virtues. And um, we actually have a paper, one of my postdocs, Michael Prinzing and I, where we examine this that's under review right now, showing that not only do you kind of across time, like if you develop things like patience and compassion and these moral virtues, yeah, it actually predicts your well being 6 months from now
Yeah.
or 2 years from now. But even in the moment, we have data looking in the moment. Because you might think, well, long term, it's good for you, but it kind of stinks in the moment and like it's hard. It is hard, but you actually, in the moment, if you have those virtues, also feel better. You have more positive emotions and less negative emotions. So even if your motives are just feel better, like that's one of the surest ways to get there for your kids is to have them practicing these pro-social behaviors that are for others.
Yeah. I mean, to actually quote the book of James, it says, "Don't be hearers of the word only, but doers as well." And I think that um, that is our call: is to be people who are doers, not only hearers. But when you actually get out there and do, first of all, one of the things that you realize that there are people out in the world who are more screwed up than you are, which is not to say that you're looking for people
Mhm.
who are screwed up to be, to help, but you realize, oh boy, there are other problems other than my
Mhm.
problems, and it gets you out of yourself. And if nothing else, you kind of go, oh, there's a lot of needs out there.
Yep.
Sometimes we have a tendency to think that we're the only people in the world with problems, especially when
Yep.
these poor teenagers look only at Instagram and
Yeah.
see these beautiful people who are having fun skiing in Aspen, they kind of go, "Oh man, why aren't I skiing in Aspen? I'm just sitting around in my my house in my bedroom in my PJs, And so
Yep.
they compare themselves, but when you get out into the big wide world and begin to help people, you begin to
Yep.
realize that we all have needs, right? And
Yep.
and it's just rubbing shoulders with other people is so powerful.
Mhm.
I I'm going to change the topic a little bit and talk. You've written a book, I believe, or you're working on a manuscript about patience.
Yep.
Patience is something that is such a powerful trait and talk about virtues. Is that
Mhm.
a virtue in your mind?
Oh, for sure.
Okay, okay. Just want to make sure we're on the right page here. I
Without a doubt,
I
yes.
I would agree. I think that patience. I think they say patience is a virtue.
Is virtuous, yes.
I think
The first
someone
thing that comes up when you do a Google search, patience is a virtue.
a virtue. So, tell us a little bit about this concept of patience,
Yep.
and why patience is valuable, and what you're finding in some of your research about patience, and how
Yeah,
and finally how to build your patience if you're an impatient person.
indeed. Um, it's interesting, kind of what we were saying a couple minutes ago, like a lot of the virtues that we have more research on are about going out and acting and doing something. So, yeah, gratitude or kindness or generosity, oftentimes in America, especially, that is fits our culture. We love to go out and do and be active. Um, but I began to study patience because I noticed sometimes in certain situations, what's really the necessary thing and what's good and right is to refrain or to wait or to learn to deal with something and to suffer for a while, perhaps. And so, um, I actually, when I was in grad school, I read a book by a moral theologian and Christian ethicist, David Bailey Harned, um, who, from the Christian position, said, in Western Christianity, people have abandoned patience as a virtue that they actually need to cultivate. And instead of realizing we have to learn to wait, instead saying, oh, we'll just fix the waiting problems and the suffering problems with technology.
Hmm. Yeah.
And since the Industrial Revolution. And so patience, it's really interesting. The root word of it is means to suffer. And that we need to learn, how can we actually suffer well? How can I be a good patient when I'm sick and not try to rush ahead, but instead to listen to the doctor and rest? How do we rest and heal and suffer and wait with excellence in a way that's morally good? Um, and no one was studying this at the time. And so with our work, we started to say, what is patience? And it's really doing that waiting and suffering well, which is important to recognize that it has two ways that could go awry. So, patience, you're still engaged with the goal. So, in a medical setting, like I still want to be healthy, or I still want to be a really good parent.
Yeah.
And that is my goal. But I could be patient as I'm trying to like train my child to be respectful. I could be impatient and be reckless and yell at them and lose my cool. And that could be not a good thing for this relationship. I could also get so overwhelmed with how difficult this task is that I start to disengage and become passive. And I stop disciplining, or I let this kid do whatever they want and run around, right? So like patience helps me to regulate my emotions
Yeah.
and to know when to speak, when not, to remain calm in the face of the adversity, the suffering, the waiting. So when my daughter was younger and would have temper tantrums, to be able to maintain my own patience and appropriately respond and not start throwing my own adult version of a temper tantrum.
That's right.
And yeah, it's really important. And we find that this is essential for well being and essential for good relationships. Yet up till this point, no one really knew like the best way to do this. So yeah,
So,
which is tough.
I'm going to ask what how you get there, but I mean the word long suffering
Yep.
is, in my mind, a synonym for patience. And I've
Yes.
never actually thought about the word suffering as being a root origin of the word patience. But long suffering, I guess, is kind of what you're talking about, where you
Yep.
actually take a deep breath and you sit back and you don't necessarily
Hmm.
you act on your emotions, which can get you in a lot of trouble. I mean, certainly in relationships, if you always are impetuous and say things that immediately come to your brain, boy oh
Yep.
boy, you're going to get yourself into a lot of trouble with those people who are around you.
Yep.
Um, so how do you? Okay, you have a teenager who's kind of out of control. How, first of all, how do you begin the process of reeling that kid back
Yep.
to, or even introducing him to the concept of patience? What
Yeah.
kind of recommendations do you have for these parents who are long suffering?
Yeah. And first, just, I mean, the first thing is like, that's hard. This is, I mean, there's research showing that although all of parenting is really challenging and requires patience, there's some evidence that I would say parenting an adolescent in particular is the most stressful. um, because you often have really hard situations, but fewer warm and fuzzies than you have with maybe a younger child. Um, and so the first thing I would say to a parent is first, is just work on your own patience because it's going to be tested as you deal with your adolescent who needs to grow in this way. Um, and the ways we would grow patience, I think, for an adolescent and an adult as a parent have some similarities. So um, I often talk, we need both a why and a how. So the how would be, how do you regulate your emotions and how do you teach that to someone? So things like taking breaths, right? Like basic kind of prayer, meditation, contemplative practices can be really helpful to just build up those skills and awareness of emotions. Um, and for that teenager, the first step, and for yourself as an adult, is going to be, what are you feeling? So just emotional awareness is a key first step to realize, oh, I've lost my patience. I'm reactive. And so helping teenagers to actually name when they're in a situation or afterwards. Sometimes some of our exercises we use to teach patients, like in the moment, it's too hot.
Yeah.
But at the like afterwards, when everyone's calmed down, say like, what were you feeling then? What was that? And teaching them to name it. So they need to identify their emotions. Um, and then we can teach what's called reappraisal, which is we like to use interesting terms, but help them after the fact to say, okay, so you were really angry with your brother and that led you to punch him, which is not okay. Um, why were you angry? Okay, let's figure that out. And then could you, for a minute, imagine that situation from another viewpoint? So, how do you think your brother, what was he thinking at the time? Or imagine, like, from a different perspective. So, maybe, oh, how could I have thought about that differently? That would have helped me not be quite so angry. That I could have instead been able to, like, be just a little bit calmer, that would have helped me not punch him. And so, it's helping guide through this process of thinking about things differently. So, one of the best ways to help ourselves regulate our emotions is to change our thoughts. And so, through this practice of first identifying the emotion, why it's there, and then changing how we think about it, if we practice this enough over time, we actually can change the way we're feeling. And so, I often remind parents, and some of the strategies with a teenager, it might need to be more fun. So a couple of years ago, we actually built an app to cultivate patients and young people that they could use. And so like a strategy we use, like teenagers love to take selfies, right? And so we said, take a selfie when you're feeling upset. And then
Yeah.
they took that selfie. And then we said, okay, now later, like, look at that picture. What were you feeling? All right, now we want you to go do something that might help you regulate your emotions. So maybe go listen to a song that might help you calm down. And then they did that. And then they said, come back to the app. Now that you've listened to that song, take another selfie. What do you notice is different? How did that activity, so whatever that activity might be, whether it's like a slow breathing activity or listening to music or talking to a friend or trying to think about it differently, helping the teenager. And if it's right, tech, right, social media can cause a lot of problems, but it also helping them to use it to maybe help with
Yeah.
some of these things is a great strategy because they're motivated to engage certain tools. And so like just small things like that to help them with that process, um, I think is really we see is a tool that can be used.
Do you actually have a clinic? Are you doing any kind of clinical work in your center where you actually bring people in and utilize and put these techniques like a teaching session? Are you doing that down there?
Not right now. In the past, we most of our work where we try to do these things, we try to do it in a way that could be self-administered by a parent or a teacher, or we've sometimes done programming with like athletic coaches or things of that sort. Because my lab, so there are labs where clinicians do this and bring it in. I am often interested in what could be broadly disseminated and what doesn't require a trained therapist necessarily. I think
Right.
we need those people desperately, but what is something that a parent could do or something an individual could say, I actually want to get better at this. Okay, what can I do with right with an app or with instructions? um, Sometimes journaling activities, things like that, that might be um, more scalable at a broad level or through a sports team or things like that.
So that's why we need you to finish your book, Sarah.
Yeah.
To
Well,
actually put it out there so people can have it.
yeah.
Um, that this is, I mean, what you're saying is absolutely true, and these are things that I talk to my teenagers in my office. Sometimes parents come in and say he's so uh, impulsive. He says things, and we say, listen, you
Yep.
you gotta quell that. I
Yep.
sometimes joke that some of these young men, in particular, these 10, 11, 12-year-old kids who are acting out need a wife. They
Alas.
yeah, because a wife would, for like it would knock him down and put him in their place in about 5, 10 minutes. I think that's kind of what they need. That the parents
Yep.
look at me with a quizzical look, kind of going, what did you just say?" They don't quite
Yep.
they don't quite appreciate my humor. So listen, a couple of things. Number one, you talk about what makes a good life,
Yep.
and there are. I'm sure that you guys in your sessions together talk about this. Can you give us a handful of ideas about what makes a good life?
And we argue, I mean, I think there are a lot of answers to that question. Sadly, a lot of people can't actually say what that is for themselves. So I know, like, as an individual, I can say, like, I can answer that question, but it's a real challenge to actually be able to actually answer that for as an individual. And as a researcher, I'm interested on what answers actually are associated with other well-being outcomes. And so one thing we have a stake in the ground and we have data to support is that a good life has to be bigger than yourself. If the good life is only about me and my pleasure and my um only myself, nothing bigger than me, that is probably a pathway to misery that does not get you there. And so, um,
Can you tease that out a little bit? Because
yeah, exactly.
something
So let me give you an
bigger than me. So
example.
give me some examples of what
Yeah.
being bigger than.
So
Yeah,
bigger than myself.
yeah.
So a lot of times this can look like, right, someone has a faith tradition that says there's an ultimate meaning and there's even a life beyond this life, and that part of the good life is about serving God or honoring God. That is bigger than yourself. That's a lot bigger. It goes even to the supernatural. Some people talk about the good life as making a contribution to the next generation or my community, and or to preserving our natural environment and caring for others and other species, other animals, and um, that is something bigger than yourself. Something that would not be bigger than yourself would be, I want just have a nice car and just to be happy and not really thinking beyond your own pleasure and needs. And I can say this, like, there was a philosophical thought of like hedonism, like just maximize pleasure. But the problem is when that's the thing someone's pursuing, it actually undermines that pursuit. So people who are trying to be happy often become less happy because the pursuit of that thing actually undermines it. Instead, you need something else that's beyond you and your own fulfillment, whether that be community contribution, um, a certain philosophy you follow, um, even if it's my team. I want to support my country. Um, but I think the research shows that when it's something more ultimate and about contributing to a bigger thing, whether that's a community, towards a religious figure, like that is often what leads to a better life. Um,
And how do you measure? I know there are happiness measurements.
yep, we
Uh,
have
uh,
tools.
so what are those tools look
Yep,
at?
yep. So we often measure, do people have meaning in life? So we can ask people about their meaning and purpose. And that is an indicator. And philosophers, right, to really answer what's a good life, you had to get some philosophers or theologians in the room. So what we try to do though as psychologists is say, well, one view of life is that life is meaningful, and that's something we can measure. We can also measure, how do you feel at different moments in daily life? Do you feel upset? Do you feel angry? Do you feel happy? Do you feel loving? Do you feel connected? Like, we can measure that. Um, and we can also, though, measure, how well is this person doing? Do they have thriving relationships? So, do they have connection to others? And is there do they have relationships that bring joy, not just to themselves, but to other people? Do they contribute? Is their work going well? So we can also ask about different domains of life. And are they doing well? How is their physical health? How is their economic situation? And so we can we can never measure this thing perfectly, but we can ask people themselves about their judgments of how they're doing. We can also ask, so sometimes in our studies, we'll ask the teenager, like, hey, can we also get your parent to fill out a survey about you? Can we get your peers, your sibling, your boyfriend, your girlfriend? Like, and what we want to see is, how do all those people judge how well this person is doing? Your doctor, and some of the studies we actually a few studies have done in psychiatric settings, right? Nurses' ratings, and right, we can start to triangulate and get a sense of how is this person really doing. Um,
I think that, and happiness spills over. When people who are happy,
yes,
it spills over into other areas of life. No question that in terms of their, prosperity and financially, even, I mean, people who, if you're a joyful and happy
yep,
waitress, guess what? people like you.
Yep.
People give you a bigger tip, and
Yeah.
people are willing to help you. They because people are attracted to happy people.
Yep.
Is that not true?
Yes. And what we find, right, rather than seeking happiness, in some ways, the experience of happiness causes other good things. So, Barbara Fredrickson is a researcher um, in North Carolina who finds that when you are happy, you actually pay attention to more things in your environment and you actually want to go out and build resources. So when you're happy, you're more likely to introduce yourself to someone and make connections. And people who are happy over time, they start to have more friends because they go out and treat them differently. And then people want to hang out with them. And guess what? Having friends makes you happy. And then you get more relationships. So these positive emotions really function to build up resources that are needed for a good, flourishing life. But when you pursue happiness itself, you actually fail at it. And so you have to kind of pursue other things. And then those happiness experiences actually then reinforce
Yeah.
um,
I
that
think that,
self.
people are other people are kind of turned off to people who are only out looking for happiness themselves.
Yes.
There's a certain vanity. I think
Yep.
that most people find vanity to be just off-putting.
Yep.
People who are super vain usually don't engender good vibes from other people. Am I
Yep.
wrong on that one?
Yeah. And I think, part of it too is that negative emotions are also really important. So when I feel fear or anxiety, like that's signaling to me, oh, I value something and help me pursue my goals. And so part of it, when someone's only pursuing happiness, they're not necessarily paying attention to like, ooh, I felt a little guilty today.
Yeah.
And that might actually be a good thing. It means I didn't do something I should have done and I need to apologize. Or I felt a little bit angry. Something's not right with the world. There's an action I need to take. And
To
so we
remedy.
don't,
Yeah.
right? That all these emotions are important. So when you're only seeking like I want to be happy and nothing else, you start to ignore those things. It can include this kind of vanity or like I just am focused on my own experience and no one else's, which is not a fun person to be around.
Yep. No.
Who is only concerned about their own emotions instead of
Yeah.
actually doing the right thing or
The
treating people well.
the bigger picture.
Yep.
So listen, I'm watching our time, and
Yep.
I made a promise to you to not keep you through your
We
dinner
will.
hour out there in Baylor. So we're gonna finish it off here. I just want to say, first of all, I want to ask, how do people find you, Doctor? Where do they find you?
Yep. I am on Twitter at Dr. Schnitker. Um, and I'm on there. I also, if you just Google Sarah Schnitker, luckily I have a very distinctive name, Sarah Schnitker Psychology, I will come up. I also have the Science of Virtues website that people can go to, although um, talks about our research more so than like very practical tips. So those are all great ways to find me. You can always email, just look up Sarah Schnitker at Baylor, and my email is there as well to connect with me.
So that's if you have questions about the science of virtue, and you have any ideas on how Dr. Schnitker could actually put that into a research project, give her a jingle. We do, by
Yeah,
the way. If you are, I would love to see your book when this time comes out. I know you're pondering that manuscript, and we'd love to see that. By the way, Sarah.
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Well, thank you so much for having me today.
It's been a pleasure. So, friends, you have tuned in today to the Hamilton Review. If you didn't know that, where kids and culture collide, we have been having a very interesting conversation with Ph.D. psychologist Dr. Sarah Schnitker. And can you spell your last name just for everyone who are going to be looking you
Yep.
up? Go ahead.
It is SC as in cat, H as in hat, N as in Nick, ITK as in Kevin, ER. Schnitker.
Schnitker.
Lots of consonants in a row. It's
yes,
challenging.
and which can kind of get muddled in my mouth. But
Yep.
Dr. Schnitker, you've been a wonderful guest, and I want to thank you for taking the time to be here. Have a wonderful holiday down there in Texas. And those of you listening, thank you guys for tuning in. It means a lot to me. So until next time, be well. Take care. Bye-bye.
You have been listening to the Hamilton Review, where kids and culture collide. Thank you for allowing us to be a part of your day. Tune in again next week on Apple Podcast. Rate and comment and tell a friend.